I'm a 34-year-old guy who grew up all my life without a father. My parents split when I was really young. Mom came from a working class background while dad was wealthy. They initially had a happy marriage, but dad's family didn't approve of him marrying mom because they thought she wasn't good enough for him and they made her life quite difficult. When I came into the picture, it seemed my dad's relatives directed their negativity towards me, pushing my mom to a breaking point. She and my dad argued about it, but he brushed it off, thinking she was just overreacting. As things escalated, my mom reached a breaking point, filing for divorce. I was too young to grasp it all, but all I remember is I went from living in a mansion with staff who waited on us to a much smaller apartment in the suburbs with just my mom and me. My grandparents on my mom's side were true lifesavers. Grandma took care of me while mom began job hunting, and grandpa kept a close eye on me, walking me to and from school until I could handle it solo. Despite dad providing child support monthly, he was never interested in being a father. On our scheduled days together, he'd often flake out at the last minute, leaving me waiting. He gradually stopped making an effort to visit me altogether. I still remember my birthday eagerly waiting for my dad to join the celebration, yet he'd either show up late and drunk or not show at all. When I grew older and had a phone of my own, I used to call my dad all the time, but he seldom picked up my calls. My mother, maybe seeing that my dad wasn't being responsible, always tried to be there for me. Oddly, that used to frustrate me even more. I guess as a fiery teenager, I always unfairly blamed my mom for why my dad didn't want to be around. One day, when I was 16 years old, I had a huge fight with my mother and ran away from home. I called my dad hoping that he could pick me up. He didn't. So I decided to just show up at his doorstep as I knew his address. I kept ringing the doorbell multiple times until my father opened the door and was taken aback seeing me. I smiled and asked him if I could come in, and that's when I noticed a woman standing behind him. She appeared to be wearing my father's shirt, which struck me as odd at first until my dad, instead of welcoming me, stepped out of the house to talk to me. He asked me if everything was okay, and I told him that I fought with my mother, so I needed to spend some time at his place until things cooled down. However, he said he wasn't equipped to take care of a teenager. I stared at him blankly, trying to understand what he meant by that. I reminded him that he was my father. He sheepishly looked at me and told me that this was just bad timing, as he was entertaining his lady friend. He started telling me that I should return home to my mother. When my dad said that to my face, it hurt. It was like my rose-tinted glasses shattered, and I saw things as they were. Coming home in tears, I told my mom, and she hugged me, trying to comfort me. She didn't even care about the fight, which made me feel a bit better about myself. After that, I stopped reaching out to my dad. He only texted on holidays or my birthday, and even then it was just a one-liner. I quit asking him to hang out or inviting him to school events. The distance just grew from there. I promised myself I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. I wanted to build a life for myself, relying on my resilience and independence. I graduated high school and headed to college with full scholarships. During college, out of the blue, my father called me up one day. It had been years since we talked, and although I hesitated, I reluctantly answered his call, thinking it might be an emergency. From the tone of his voice, he seemed to be drunk. He happily announced that he was getting married next month. I remained stunned as he went on to say he wanted me to meet the love of his life, as he put it, and her children, who are going to be my step-siblings. Hearing this was like a pang in my chest. Although by this point I knew that my dad didn't love me, I had always chalked it up to the fact that he didn't like kids. But hearing him talk about the stepkids made me wonder if he just didn't love me specifically. He went on and on about how wonderful the stepkids are and can't wait for me to meet them. I politely declined, saying that I was very happy about his marriage, but I didn't want to be involved with his new family. He immediately started begging me, wanting me to be a part of his wedding ceremony. I didn't think this was a good idea at all and did my best to get out of it, but he seemed adamant when I talked with my mother regarding his marriage. She was as surprised as I was. She didn't expect him to call me after so many years when we had not spoken to each other. She reminded me that I was an adult now, hence I was free to make my own decisions if I wanted to reconnect with him or not. After days of contemplation, I reluctantly agreed to him, hoping this might signal a fresh start for us and that he had genuinely changed. My father invited me for dinner so I could meet his new family before they got married. The dinner was an absolute nightmare, to say the least. His fiancée, Kayla, absolutely hated me in every sense. Her stepkids, Brandon and Ursula, weren't keen on me and refused to talk. The dinner was uncomfortable, clearly showing they didn't want me there. My father remained completely oblivious to the fact and rambled on and on about how he is proud to be a dad to 3 kids now and couldn't wait to watch us all bond as a family. It grated on me to hear how he wanted to be a part of a family when he couldn't be a family man for me and my mom. He aimed to be a father to his stepkids after years of failing to be one to me. Deciding to let it slide, I kept my mouth shut, wanting to give him the benefit of the doubt that he had truly changed. As we were eating our food, he brought up his will and told me that he had had to change the ownership of his property since he was going to be married now. I nodded, not really into the conversation. Then he dropped the bomb. He invited me tonight to reveal he is transferring his entire fortune and businesses to his stepkids, Brandon and Kayla. I stopped eating, looking at him in surprise. He said he didn't want me to be shocked later, so he's giving me a heads up. I took a deep breath, asking why he was telling me now, given I've never asked for any of his money or businesses. He explained it was at Kayla's insistence, so I wouldn't bother her kids later. He continued saying I already had a job and he didn't think I needed financial help, while Brandon and Kayla, being jobless, needed to learn the ropes of his business for financial success. He thought this would allow them to be financially successful in life. I sat there, processing the bombshell he just dropped, trying to keep my composure. I asked him if he understood what this meant to me. He calmly explained that it was a practical decision for the financial future of his new family. I couldn't hold back my frustration and disappointment. I reminded him of the years he wasn't there for me, emotionally or financially, and now he was giving everything to his stepchildren. It felt like a slap in the face. My dad seemed surprised by my irritation and asked if giving away his fortune to his stepkids was the cause. I looked him straight in the eye and clarified that I didn't care about his money covering my life. What I wanted was for him to be a good parent to me. I went on to express that my anger stemmed from him prioritizing his stepkids over me, his own flesh and blood. In response, my father attempted to justify his actions, saying I shouldn't be jealous of Brandon and insisting he treated everyone the same way. But the truth was, his words only deepened the wound, emphasizing the stark contrast between how he treated his biological child and his stepchildren. Despite my anger, I decided not to create a scene at the dinner table. I finished my meal in silence, feeling a mix of hurt and resentment. It was clear that I was never a priority in my father's life, and I was left grappling with the realization that his promises of change were nothing more than empty words. After dinner, I thanked him for the dinner and said goodbye to Kayla and her kids. I left the restaurant, and upon reaching my dorm, I immediately blocked him and his entire new family. I was determined to have nothing more to do with them. After that dinner, I stopped thinking about my father and wanted nothing to do with him. Just a few days later, I got a friend request on Facebook from a guy named Michael. Without much thought, I accepted. Then bam! Michael messaged me with a picture asking if I knew these people. My brows furrowed as I downloaded the picture and saw that it was a picture of my dad with his new family. Confused, I asked where he got it and why he was sending it to me. Michael continued by saying he checked my dad's profile and found old pictures of me with him, and noticing our similar features, he assumed that I was his son. He explained that he knew Brandon and Ursula from school days and wanted to discuss something crucial with my dad. Since my dad never responded, he decided to reach out to me. Intrigued, I asked what the important matter was, and that's when he dropped a bomb. He revealed that both Brandon and Kayla had a history of scamming people, growing up in the same neighborhood. Brandon was notorious for his gambling issues and had garnered a significant debt he couldn't repay. Meanwhile, Kayla had a penchant for stealing cosmetics and dresses from local stores. Their reputation for theft and gambling was well known. So when one day Kayla suddenly vanished with her kids, it left everyone in their neighborhood shocked. Michael wanted to warn us about them in case they were scammed as well. I asked for proof, and he sent me screenshots of group chat messages where people had discussed Brandon owing them money. He also shared mugshots of Brandon from a past arrest, indicating a troublesome history. Regarding Kayla, since Michael worked as mall security, he had video evidence of her stealing clothes from the stores. The mall's manager, who had already blacklisted her, didn't mind the video going viral to caution others. This got me really concerned because despite not wanting a relationship with my father, I still didn't want him to get hurt. Plus, he had just handed over his entire fortune to them, thinking he would enjoy a good retirement. If these kids were indeed scammers, as Michael warned, his wealth could vanish in no time. I opened up to my mother about this and sought her advice. She was just as shocked as I was. We agreed, and she took the initiative to talk to him, conveying what Michael had shared with me. As expected, my dad didn't take it well and started arguing with my mother. Despite her recounting the entire story, he refused to believe us, suggesting I might be making up the story to get my hands on his wealth. Even when my mom tried showing him the proof Michael sent me, he rejected it, insisting Brandon and Kayla couldn't be involved in such things. My mother is a no-nonsense woman and immediately shut him down. She reminded him that we did our part by giving him a heads up, and now it was up to him to decide what to do. Dad continued to deny any involvement of his beloved stepchildren in scams. He even sent me an email, because he was unable to reach me on call and messages, as I blocked him, that I had gone too low this time and that he couldn't believe I would try to sabotage his relationship with his stepchildren. I was beyond pissed and decided to let this go. I knew his karma was coming to him. He had left his entire fortune to his stepkids who had a history of scamming. Even after I warned him, he blamed me instead of looking into their past, so I had done my part and there was nothing that I could do anymore. This was the last time I ever heard from my father. Both me and my mother cut him off permanently. Years passed after that incident. My mother eventually got married to a wonderful man named Luke. He's a fantastic partner to her and I enjoy spending time with him. I graduated college and currently work in a great company. Through the years, I and my mother have heard from our mutual friends that my dad hasn't been doing well. As expected, his newfound children were slowly depleting his wealth, and the businesses were accumulating a lot of debt. We never interfered, nor did we bother to check up on him. I had moved into my very own apartment and was enjoying my freedom and independence as an adult. One day the doorbell rang. Opening it, I was surprised to see my father standing there. a mere shadow of the man he once was. I couldn't believe how different he looked and asked if everything was okay. I asked him what he was doing here. He explained that he was in a fix and had nowhere to go. He had gone to my mother's place, but no one answered her bell. I informed him that my mother was on vacation with her husband. He then told me that he had to reach out to our mutual friends to inquire about my address so he could come and see me instead. He asked me if he could come in for a moment. Torn between compassion and years of resentment, I let him in with the condition that he had 10 minutes to explain himself before I would ask him to leave. The tension hung heavily in the air as I gestured for him to take a seat, suppressing the storm of emotions swirling within me. He nervously confessed that he had lost his entire fortune because of Kayla and Brandon. I didn't even flinch at the news because I knew this was going to happen one day and had warned him years ago. He went on to explain that they had plunged the business into substantial debt, unable to repay their loans. Consequently, the bank seized their family house for repayment. Now they were left homeless, residing in a motel. When he tried to talk to Kayla about her children's actions, she got furious and threatened him with divorce. She told him that her children were just trying to do what they felt was right and that he should not criticize them for it. I was listening to him quietly, but at this point I couldn't help but interject. I asked him why he was so surprised with what they had done when I had warned him about this very thing. He explained that back then he didn't want to believe me, thinking I was just jealous of him, favoring them. He genuinely believed they were good kids. To my shock, he then started blaming me that I should have tried to convince him better, and then maybe this mess could have been avoided. I decided that I wanted to teach him a lesson for never taking responsibility for his own stupid mistakes. Determined, I turned on the TV and connected my phone via Bluetooth. I wanted him to witness all the evidence Michael had sent me years ago regarding Brandon and Ursula. My father's eyes widened as he witnessed a cascade of evidence, screenshots, mugshots, and a video capturing Kayla's theft from the mall. The consequences of his decision to trust these deceitful stepchildren were unfolding before him. The pain, betrayal, and devastation filled the room, echoing the emotions he had unknowingly subjected me to years ago. It was a visual reckoning, a bitter recollection of the choices he had made. Mark sat in stunned silence, confronted by the consequences of his actions. The room carried the unspoken weight of truth, and I seized the moment to deliver my own verdict. "This, Mark, is just the beginning," I declared, my voice steady and resolute. "You lost everything because you refused to believe me and my mother when we told you the truth about them. Your legacy is all gone, and now you must face the reality of your decision." I expressed how, all my life, I had held on to the belief that he was a good person, only to be consistently disappointed at every turn, and now I'm glad he's getting his karma. He began protesting, suggesting I could have taken the evidence to the police, claiming it could have helped him uncover the truth about them. I shouted back, making it clear that it wasn't my responsibility to report them. I reminded him that my mother had tried to show him proof, but he had stubbornly refused. What more did he expect us to do? I firmly asserted that he had no one to blame but himself for losing his entire fortune. He should have known better. With that, I directed him to the door, firmly asking him to leave my apartment. Stunned, he exited silently. Revenge wasn't about sinking to his level. It was about exposing the extent of his misjudgment and ensuring that the consequences of his misplaced trust echoed in the haunting silence of his conscience. Although I feel great about my decision to finally show him the truth about his stepchildren, I can't seem to forget the betrayal on his face when he finally realized who they were. AITA for not convincing my dad enough when he handed off his entire fortune to his stepchildren who have had a history of scamming people. Update 1. I am overwhelmed with everyone's reactions to my post. I just posted a few hours ago and I already have hundreds of comments. The majority of you seem to agree that I had done all that I could to help my dad avoid this misfortune. To the rest, who believe that I could have done better, I just want to clarify that my mother had a very serious conversation with him regarding this, hoping that he would see the truth, but my dad refused to believe us. I didn't want to reach out to him at that time because I was too hurt and wanted to protect my mental health. It was he who took this decision without consulting anyone else. He also never did a background check on Kayla and the kids. With a simple background check, he could have avoided all of this. I don't know if I will ever be ready to have a relationship with my father, or at least at the moment, because he has put me through a lot in the past. I will, however, join therapy as advised by everyone so I can work on my issues. Update 2. Hey, something interesting has happened, so I had to update my story. It's been a few weeks since the incident with my dad, but unexpectedly, last night I received a very drunken call from him in the middle of the night. His words were slurred and he could hardly speak. Concerned, I inquired if something had happened, but the call abruptly disconnected. Worried for his safety, I made multiple attempts to reach him by calling back. A man finally answered the call and identified himself as the bartender. He informed me that my dad was in no state to walk and asked me to come pick him up. After receiving the bar's location, I immediately drove there. Upon arrival, I found my dad completely sloshed, repeatedly expressing nonsensical regrets about his actions with my mother and emphasizing that the only person he could depend on was me. Ignoring his comments, I helped him into the car. Uncertain if I should take him in this state to see Kayla at the motel, I asked if he wanted to sleep it off in my apartment. My dad replied that he couldn't go back to her. I asked him what he meant by that, and then he told me that Kayla had left him. I wanted to ask him more, but realized that he wasn't in a position to provide much information, so I drove him back to my home. As I write this, my dad is currently snoring in the next room, and I'm waiting for him to wake up so I can ask him about last night. It was quite unusual for my dad to drink so heavily yesterday. I have informed my mother, who's back from her vacation, and she's on her way to my apartment. She wants to be present when we confront him about what happened last night. Update 3. Basically, after my father woke from his slumber, my mom and I confronted him about the truth. He seemed reluctant to open up about it, so I sternly asked him not to disturb my sleep by calling me again in the middle of the night. He apologized, explaining that the reason he was hesitating to tell us anything was because he was ashamed. He then went on to reveal that Kayla had left him. After he had watched all the evidence I had shown him on my TV, he confronted Kayla, who refused to accept her children's mistakes and argued that I was making it all up. When my father threatened to involve the police, she finally confessed. Kayla revealed how her children had always been scammers. She had attempted to reform them, but they stubbornly clung to their ways. She had relocated from her town to this big city in an attempt to start a new life where no one knew them. When she met my father, she saw financial stability and hoped her children would change eventually. However, they persisted in their reckless lifestyle, accumulating more debt. She confessed that she knew about it all along, but had never imagined that they would end up with nothing. They fought even more, and Kayla confessed that now that my father had nothing to offer, she had been contemplating leaving him. She packed her bags and left. My father was almost in tears as he recounted the incident. While I felt sympathy for him, I couldn't help but reflect on how he had dug his own grave by trusting a woman over me. If only he had listened to me, he would still have his family mansion and business. My father then began apologizing profusely. Tearfully, he asked my mother for forgiveness, acknowledging the pain he had caused her. He admitted that he should never have let her go. Turning to me, he asked if I could find it in myself to forgive him. We remained silent, and my father expressed his commitment to spending the rest of his life trying to make amends with me. Kayla and my father are awaiting discussions with their lawyers to file for divorce. I hope my father takes legal action against her and her children for everything he has lost. It's likely to be a challenging legal battle, as they might not easily admit their mistakes. However, with the evidence I gave him and the information my father will gather from his business operations about their mismanagement of company funds, he might have enough to hold them accountable. It remains to be seen what happens with his divorce. For now, I hope he learns to live with his mistakes every day and realizes just what he missed out on when he left my mother and me in the past. I hope he realizes his mistakes and grows into a better man over time. As for me, I will keep my head up and try to be the best version of myself, just like my mother taught me to be. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.